guys, welcome to week 17. Our question this week is, how did the Norman Ascendency impact English society? So a little background first. Everyone probably knows this, but the Battle of Hastings, 1066, the Normans come into England and they take over. William the Conqueror becomes the King of England, and the Normans are the rulers in England. So this changes a lot of English society. Yeah, I guess that's the background. So although everyone learns about the 1066 Battle of Hastings, many don't realize just how dramatically Norman conquest reshaped English society. The Norman conquest transformed English society by replacing the Anglo-Saxon power structure and culture with the Franco-Scandinavian one. So the three ways that Norman ascendancy impacted English society. First, it restructured society with Frankish castles, Romanesque churches, and monasteries. Second, the French-speaking Norman rulers, they transformed the English language. And third, the Norman feudalism fundamentally changed English political system. Okay, so number one, firstly, Norman ascendancy restructured society, culture. So there was all these Frankish castles and Romanesque churches and monasteries that were built after the Norman ascendancy, and they became centers in the Anglo-Norman society. We're gonna mostly talk about the castles of the Normans, and those are the most interesting, and the way that most shows that Norman ascendancy impacted England. So the Normans had these castles that they would build, and they were built not from wood like a lot of the buildings in those days, but they were built from stone. One great thing about these castles, Ella Armitage says that small castles of the Norman kind were easily and cheaply constructed and defensible by a small number of men. So for the Normans, they could easily construct these really big and powerful looking castles, and they didn't need a ton of soldiers to defend them. So what these castles did was give it was a symbol that the Normans were in England to stay and that they were powerful. So this showed all the people in England were here to stay. Don't mess with us. Like, we will kill you. We have castles. That's a great quote. We will kill you. We have castles. That was the Normans. Yeah. Churches also were similar to the Norman castles. They were also symbols of authority, and they showed the piety of the Normans. Castles did a great job of showing power, and we have this anecdote from the lecture, and it's about Sir John de Courcy. And Sir John de Courcy crossed the Irish Sea as part of the Norman invasions, and in 1177, John decided he wanted some Irish land that he was conquering. So 22 knights and 300 soldiers went with him to Ireland, and they began to conquer their land. John had no permission, obviously. No permission to invade this land, but he did it anyway because he was John de Courcy, and yeah, he could do whatever he wanted. And on this land that he invaded, and conquered, he built a castle in Dundrum called Dundrum Castle, and he built it to withstand attacks from the army. So this was really important because this was a really well-built castle to withstand army attacks. But de Courcy was captured by the King of England in 1204 because he was not allowed to do any of this, and so he was sent back to England. But John de Courcy didn't like England, and he said, "Screw you guys, I'm going back to Ireland." So that's what he did, and he laid siege to his own castle, Dundrum Castle. But since he had built it to withstand military attacks, he obviously couldn't conquer it after he had laid siege to it. So in 1205, King John's like, "Really, we're doing this again?" And he recaptures or imprisons John de Courcy, and John de Courcy dies in poverty and with no amazing legacy to leave behind. So that's the story of John de Courcy and his Dundrum Castle. The moral is, don't make a castle too strong, or if you ever want to come back and lay siege to it, then you're not going to be able to. And John Hudson tells us that by the reign of Henry I, about 1,000 Norman castles had been built. So that's a ton. And some of these castles, the main one was in London, the Tower of London. This is a pretty famous one. I actually went to visit this one and spent like 6 hours in this castle type thingy. We spent such a long time there. Anyway, castles are pretty cool, and yeah, cheers to that. So that's my first point, that the Norman ascendancy restructured culture. And then my second point, the conquest of England by French-speaking Normans transformed the English language. Oh, gosh. Okay, so when we think about English, its roots come from, English is basically a language that is a mixture of multiple languages. So there's Germanic, there's Latin, there's French, there's Greek, and then there's some unknown languages in there. But it is a very complicated mix of languages. And when the Normans came into England, they gave a lot of the French influence to the Anglos and transformed the language. So now after the Normans came, the language became more understandable to modern people. So the Lord's Prayer, that is one example. Today we can still understand most of the Lord's Prayer from this time after the Norman ascendancy, but before, in Old English, it's pretty hard to understand and to read the Old English version of the Lord's Prayer. So let's talk about modern English. So Dr. Parker always says, quote, "People like the English language because it is so easy to lie in." And so this is really true because there's so much vocabulary in the English language that you can easily get away with like changing the meaning, or like it's all about the connotation basically of the word. So with this whole mixture of language from all these different places, the English language is so vast. There's this quote: "The modern English language is estimated to be between 400,000 and 600,000 words. Many of them have more than one meaning. The nearest language word count is French with a mere 150,000. So that's like a ton of words in the English language, and this all came from a mixture of being conquered and having other influences on England. And then we have this story that's kind of interesting from this guy on YouTube, kind of looks like Hitler. No, he doesn't. Yeah, he kind of does. He looks very German, and he argues that English with an A, is a Germanic language, and it can be spoken without any influence of the Romance languages, which is a really interesting point. But I think that the Germanic language, the Germanic English that he's talking about, would be really hard to adapt as a whole society. So I don't think it's really a good argument to make that the English language is a 100% Germanic language, but it is possible to speak English without Romance languages. It's possible to speak it in completely Germanic form, which is English. So this was before the Normans came. But yeah, that's the story for the second point. So that is how Norman ascendancy impacted the language of the English. And thirdly, Norman feudalism led to changes in political system and helped pave a way for documents like the Magna Carta. So William the Conqueror comes in to rule over England, and he introduces a new feudal system to Britain. William divided up all of England, which he considered to be his land, and 1/5 was for him, 1/4 was for the church, and the rest was given to 170 barons who conquered England with him. So this was the skeleton of a feudal system that William set up right after he conquered England. And by the end of the distribution, William had about 6,000 manors in England. And yeah, this system paved the way for Parliament and for the Magna Carta. And yeah, the Magna Carta, which was written in 1215. I think it's 1215. Yeah, 1215. I was gonna say 1205. Sorry, I just got a text. Anyway, sorry. Now I'm distracted. Okay. So the Magna Carta that came after the Norman Ascendancy established the principle that everyone, even the king, was subject to the law. So this was a pretty new thing, but it was really revolutionary because the king couldn't go around doing whatever he wanted. We talked last week about the absolute power of the king and how the Magna Carta changed the absolute power of the king, and this is basically the same thing this week. The king was subject to the law as much as the people were. And then also, after the Norman Ascendancy, Parliament began. It began about 1236. Yeah, 1236, and Parliament was the meeting of like a bunch of knights knights and barons that would come together like once or twice a year to meet with the king, and basically to have like a council about land and taxes and all that kind of stuff, and that slowly became Parliament. So that was the beginnings of it. So yeah. So how did Norman ascendancy impact England? First, it restructured society with the Frankish castles, Romanesque churches, and the monasteries. Second, the French-speaking Norman rulers influenced and transformed the English language. And third, Norman feudalism fundamentally changed the English political system. Okay, peace out, my dudes. Have a good Have a good Monday. I know I won't.